Hi everyone, welcome to InvisibleTears. This is Sanjay here, and today we're going to talk about men's mental health issues in the US, and specifically take a deep dive on single parent family perspective. We've got Matt Herrera here. He's a good friend of mine. We met at MIT, and he's building a company that is promoting a social cause. So I'll let Matt introduce himself and talk about the company as well, and then we'll deep dive into the topic.
Very good. Thank you, Sanjay. So Matt Herrera, live in a suburb north of Atlanta, Georgia. And as Sanjay mentioned, yes, we met at MIT and been working on a project for a couple of years now, a risk model for financial credit underwriting. And we've been working on this for a few years now. And my background professionally, 13, 14 plus years in financial services in a couple different roles, from the retail banking group into treasury and C&I. And we saw something that was missing from the ecosystem. And so that's what we're trying to build.
Brilliant. And Matt, before we dive into the topic, what motivated you to do this? Because it's connected to what we're talking about, so it's probably worth discussing that.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting about this topic is, from my own experience, I can tell you that while I don't necessarily have mental health issues, in my career and as a person growing up, there were things in life that weren't perfect, and you attribute imperfections to how they shape you as an individual. And I think the topic is relevant to everyone because no one has a perfect upbringing. And it's interesting to see some of the data on specifically in the US on how imperfect society is, right?
Yeah.
And I think everyone can have some connectivity to that. So that's why this is very interesting for me.
Got it. And your business, the company that you're trying to build, obviously supports that cause as well by helping social mobility, and that's one of the ways in which you can improve mental health, because income disparity and let's say discrimination or institutional racism, whatever issues there are in any society that stop people from progressing and having opportunities, they do create mental health problems, right?
That's correct. I feel strongly about being able to provide value in a manner that helps a segment of a population. There are a lot of issues and a lot of problems with the current system. In 2020, those have been exposed and accelerated by the global pandemic.
Right.
But you're right. There are a lot of societal issues and a lot of civil issues that are being heard from around the world, not just the US, of course. And you're exactly right. I think that the conversation has always been there, but it's a little bit more pronounced at this moment right now.
All right, so let's deep dive into the topic. Maybe start with the US first, broader.
Sure.
What's your perspective on men's mental health in the US? How bad is it? How good is it? Is there a massive issue at all? And is there culturally, socially, does the support system work? And if you can throw some light on that.
Yeah, I'll speak from my own experience, which is at a very young age, I was in a broken family. My parents, they got divorced when I was about 5 years old.
Okay.
And luckily I was one of 3 children and I was the youngest. So, going through that experience, I think alone would be extremely difficult and have some major issues and repercussions mentally. Having siblings that you can talk to and go through that experience together, you feel like you're kind of a team. And it's weird when you're a child, you don't fully appreciate the impact until it hits you personally. And the way that it hit us personally was we didn't have a bad upbringing, but we had a hard upbringing,
Right.
meaning, we had, there were times when we did not get to do or have certain things that other peers
Mm-hmm.
had access to. And, the cycle of going through something like that is you go through a lot of emotions, certainly. And, from a statistic standpoint, um, while I don't have a lot of the issues that you've shared, and that are pronounced in the U.S., the numbers are really unfathomable of how severe and dire the situation is. I can tell you that going through that experience as a 5-year-old, it probably shaped a lot of my thinking in that, um, there are ways that you can uh, channel
Mm-hmm.
this emotion into fuel for productivity, and not everyone can do that. And I feel lucky that I was able to find that within myself to be able to do that. But looking at some of the data that you've shared, you can see that a lot of different negative outlets are exposed that lead into some serious chronic issues for
Yeah.
particularly white males in the U.S.
Got it. And so from that perspective, it's great that you managed to channel that emotion effectively
Right.
in a positive direction, right? But how much did your environment, your friend network, and the school you were going to, potentially, your the parent you were with, your mom and your
Yeah.
siblings, how much did all of that contribute to it? Do you think, or was it not a factor? Because I feel like there might be a correlation between neighborhoods, the kind of neighborhood you live in, and the emotional state you're in. Because if you're vulnerable and if you're in a shady neighborhood, it's quite likely that you'll get into shady activities, right?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we were fortunate to not live in a rough part of town.
Mhm.
We lived in a humble part of town,
Right.
modest. Um, and I do think that probably had some really positive impact on how we spent our time.
Right.
If you don't have, a second parent kind of guiding
Mm.
the family, then you're absolutely correct. There are a lot of different avenues that you can get exposed to. One thing that really helped us as kids manage this was my mom put us in an after school program at a local church.
Right.
And so, at churches, you get mentorship of compassion
Mm.
and of empathy. And they had a a kids program that we were involved in during school. And then when we weren't in school, we would go to the boys club, Boys and Girls Club,
Got it.
which is similar to a YMCA. And they do a very good job of providing mentorship in different avenues and sports and
Mhm.
teamwork, team building exercises, things of that nature.
Got it. So I guess in one way, your time was being invested more effectively in
Yep.
building skills
Right.
and your mental and physical development. But also, I mean, clearly there is a replacement of the moral values or view that you would have received from a father figure,
Right.
that now you're receiving from, let's say, the church or the priest or
Right.
religion, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
in a situation where that might not be possible, does that sort of result in a much higher likelihood of people then leading lives where morals don't really play a role?
Yeah. I would say that plays a huge factor
Okay.
in being someone that was productive versus someone that wasn't productive. We got lucky, and my mom was smart enough to know that she needed a second and third hand.
Mm-hmm.
The other issue is part of the immediate family structure is my grandma
Mm.
did a very good job of caring for us, providing for us, and you know giving really the things that we need that she could provide. She was there for. And without that, I think, to your point, without some structures in place,
Mm.
it would have been a different outcome.
Right. So effectively, I mean, you were, well, nature versus nurture, right? So naturally, you were inclined towards channeling your emotions positively anyway. You
Yeah.
then were in an environment where your mom was, loving and smart enough to realize that there was an anchor required, and that probably was the church and the YMCA
Right.
and then that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. And then you also had that nurturing environment in the family.
Right.
Um, and if you were to rate, these, let's say, three areas, and we'll talk about friends later. I don't know what role your friends played in supporting you through this, but if you were to just take these three, right?
Yeah.
Which one, if just pull one of them out, which one would it be that would completely make the whole thing collapse? Like the likelihood of you ending up, positively channeling your emotions and energy.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think if you were to pull the immediate family member, which was my grandmother, if you were to pull her out of the equation, uh, it would have been a different outcome completely, because you're not at an after school church
Mm-hmm.
group. You're there for maybe 2 hours, right?
Right.
The thing is very similar with the boys club, in that you were there and you learned things, and foundationally you had some things that were uh, you know underneath the team building exercises. But even with that, without the grandma kind of instilling those values at home
Mm-hmm.
or in her home, along with a meal and a conversation, um, I think the outcome could have been completely different.
It's very
So
interesting. I mean, I would not have guessed that, because you did say if you didn't have your own ability to channel your emotions, there would be
yeah,
a problem, because you're basically saying that that can still be done if you have support. Um, your mom is important, but maybe you pick your grandmom because your mom was working, she didn't have the time. Maybe when you're younger, you tend to be less
yeah,
patient with kids.
yeah,
Grandparents are very patient and they explain things better.
yeah.
So I'm just trying to sort of process this, because it's an interesting answer. Um, and and obviously a lot of people don't have that, right?
Yeah,
Don't have that, you know, calm, composed, you uh, let's say, sounding board
right.
where where you can test things and ideas, and they're patient with you, and they'll explain things, and they'll explain 100 times if they need to. A parent would probably do
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Right, and so that's an interesting one, because I don't see many people spending too much time with their grandparents in today's day and age.
It was yeah, it's a good point. It was an interesting uh way for us to continue to get, care.
Hmm.
Um I'll kind of share the reason for that. So after the divorce, my mom had to work two jobs. And obviously, if you're working two jobs, that means time not spent with your children.
Yes.
And on top of that, she then studied to become a nurse. And so that took a lot of time on top of working two jobs. And so essentially, she was a great model for me in the project, in that she helped her family climb out of
Yeah.
a situation, right? And that was really the reason that my grandmother stepped up, was
Mhm.
because she knew how hard my mom was working to get us into a better um, economic status,
I see.
with more opportunity.
Got it. And so basically, I mean, if I were to sort of digest that and play it back from your mom, you're basically getting a lot of work ethics, perseverance, tenacity, you know, go get it, work hard,
Yeah.
and that kind of values.
Yep.
From your grandmother, you're getting probably the more moral anchors that you need.
Yep.
They're
Yep.
being reinforced in the church and in the religious establishment,
Right. Yeah.
and all of that is then playing into sports is an interesting one, because sports just combines all of them. technically
Right.
speaking. And sports is probably the place where you people figure out how does all of this fit together.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yep.
so that's amazing. And look, what impact did your childhood have of you're not having a father figure, not seeing how a husband wife relationship ideally should work,
Yeah.
good husband wife relationship, did that have an impact on your relationships in adult life?
Yeah. It's a good question. And it's, I think if you were to ask me this question prior to having a child myself, our daughter, I would have answered it differently.
Right.
When you have a child, everything changes, right? And you appreciate how much work it is
Yeah.
to be in a relationship. It is a full-time job, right? It's very rewarding, but it's also there's work involved, and there's a lot of compromise involved. And uh, when you look at how you're bringing your child up,
Mm-hmm.
um, you hate to say you're becoming your parents, right? As a young person, you're like, oh, I'll never be like my parents. You quickly understand that that's not a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
If you're carrying forward the positives of your upbringing, it can be very, very helpful. I think for me, I tend to be a little bit harder and expect a little bit more.
I see.
As most dads do. I think that's probably not something that's unique to myself.
Yeah.
You're probably a father like that, as the same as a high performer yourself. You probably have some high expectations. You probably have some empathy, of course, because they're kids. But at the same time, you probably have held them to a standard that they would not on their own be held to.
Yeah, I mean, it's mine is an interesting one because I went through a bit of a journey last year as well. Prior to that, I was probably a taskmaster, a little bit of a taskmaster. And if it has to be done, it has to be done.
Right.
It has to be done now.
Yeah.
Yesterday, if possible,
Right.
but but I've evolved from there, and I've just realized. I mean, personally, I've sort of stopped, controlling things too much. But that's just my that's
Sure.
my journey and my realizations that I don't really believe in much control anyway, and expectations. I want my kids to be happy,
Right.
doing what they're doing, and so even if they are on the lower end of the income strata, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like lots of Indians are, very happy on less than $1 a day, right? um, so
Yeah.
what I have gone from is you need to get things done. You need to achieve stuff through. I think it's more important to be happy, and you figure out your own way.
Right.
I can't tell you how to be happy. I can't tell you why you should be happy. You need to figure out what makes you happy and how it makes you happy, and get it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's me. But that's I guess a sidebar conversation we should have in the next
Sure.
video. But yeah, coming back to your point, so because of your childhood and the struggles you faced, and you saw your mom working 2 jobs and studying, also trying to get you did that make you hold uh, hard work in a very high regard, that hey, you need to work hard, you need to go and achieve stuff. I don't want you to have my childhood.
Yeah.
I don't want your kids to have my childhood. So even if you don't get it, I will make sure that you get there. Is that
Yeah.
fair? Or
I think that is fair. You do recognize when you're growing up that the things that you have,
yeah,
they didn't just get bestowed on you; they were earned, right?
yep,
And that's material things. That's the things that are intangible, like love. All of that requires work, and I think the turning point for me, at least, as a child going through that experience, was My mom could have easily let that defeat her, right? That's a huge personal setback.
Sure.
And it could have, she could have taken a different path. She could have chose something unproductive. She could have chose a life of government assistance. She could have chose substance abuse. She could have chose child neglect, and she didn't, right?
Yeah.
So I feel very lucky in that we did not ever experience any of those things.
Yeah.
And it did shape who I am as an adult,
Yeah.
and knowing that you can go through something traumatic, but it doesn't have to be, the side effect doesn't have to be a downward spiral.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. And as humans, we tend to sort of uh, project our values and morals on our kids, right? So
Right.
you clearly have hold your mom in very high regard for what she's done, especially in the context of American society, where
Yeah.
single parent families but rarely have successful kids coming out of them, and so clearly your mom did something amazing, and you hold that in high regard, and
Right.
that's also then expected of your kids, and you expect
Yeah.
that of yourself too. So and then you expect it of your kids too.
Yeah. I think that's right. And I think you asked the question of, not having a father figure at a young age. I think the biggest thing that it taught me was to be independent, right?
Yeah.
To be able to ask the questions and then figure out the answers.
Yeah.
And you kind of apply that to everything. And when
Mm.
you look at everything as a challenge that needs to be solved, and you know that you're equipped to figure out that
Yeah.
challenge, um, there's a level of independence there that, not having a father was an additional tool that I was able to add into, you know, the toolbox, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. One could either go, the way of I've got no idea what I should be doing, so I'm completely unhinged, right?
Right.
Or one could go down the road saying, okay, this gives me the ability to decide what I should do,
Yeah.
and let me make some smart choices.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and then, but this one question that sort of is intriguing me now. We know that statistically, what your mom did is very rare in America, right? As a single parent. And that's great. And we also know that, and especially in the context of more single parent women uh, being abusive towards their children in America. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's a statistic that just surprised me, right? That women
Right.
in a single parent, if they're a single parent woman managing a family, they're going to be more abusive to their kids than men, right? Probably men just get drunk and sleep, right? Who knows? But
Right.
but what is it in your mom's life that made her that way, that made her sort of detached from the norm?
Yeah. I think just that situation of, you know, immediately after that happened, we were on food stamps. We were on government assistance. I remember standing in line waiting to get food stamps.
Mm.
And I think just the gravity of that moment, of having three children, of having no support, um, was really the trigger, because she had a pretty, from what I understand, she had a pretty normal, positive upbringing, right?
Okay.
And so it was a trigger of, I'm in this moment. I have three children and I've got to figure this out. Right. And I think it was just a trigger for her at that moment to kind of step up to the plate and do that.
Makes sense. And
Yeah.
what I was thinking about is transgenerational trauma, right? So
Yeah.
most cases where the single parent is abusive to the children and doesn't really care and creates a negative environment for them,
Right.
it's much more likely that they were treated the same way by their parents,
Yeah.
right? And their family, because they didn't have a good anchor, a good foundation. They
Yeah.
cannot then provide it to someone else, especially if the situation suddenly goes south,
Yeah.
right? Because they have no idea how to deal with it.
Yeah. And I would, not that we were ever abused by any means, but it's different now when you're in school and you have children. well, not now because of COVID, but corporal
Back in the day
punishment.
when schools were running.
Yeah, right, exactly. But you talk about corporal punishment, getting a spanking, by a principal.
Hmm.
So because she didn't have access to us in school, and if we acted up, she gave them the right to punish us. And so, at home, if we acted out or did something, I got hit with a comb, with a spatula, whatever was around at that
Yeah,
moment to, hey, settle down, calm down. You can't do that nowadays, right?
yeah,
It's a little bit different. And I think the time was different, but, you talk about structure and you talk about, transitioning trauma, that kind of thing. I think by allowing her, to give permission to the school to paddle us if we got in trouble, I think that was the right move, you
yeah.
know, because she didn't have a father to come home to and get scolded at. You needed to have immediate, you know, uh,
Correction, yeah.
yeah, be reprimanded immediately. So,
Yeah, I think, and in that respect, assuming that the punishment is not too severe,
right.
and is not durationally intense.
Yeah.
Um, there is one thing that is very important, which is consistency, right? So you
Right.
don't want to be punished unless some specific type of events are happening,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And I think within and not talking about your family, because that's obviously not the case there, but
Yeah.
in most transgenerational trauma, what happens is there is no consistency in the way
Yeah.
parents treat the kids, and so it can be extremely intense and long duration punishment for literally nothing, and almost for doing good stuff you can get punished, and then you can do completely bad stuff and nobody is even looking, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that creates the dysregulation in the system.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah.
so I mean, I guess as with everything, you need to put things in context, right? So punishment is good, but as long as it's consistent, it's not too
Yeah.
severe and it's not too long. uh,
Right.
well, not necessarily good, but punishment may not be bad. Let's put
Yeah.
it that way.
Right.
Okay, and so what's the again we've sort of covered most of the angles except for your friends. Did your friends have a big role to play as well?
Yeah. You did ask that, and uh, in that experience when I was 5, I kept to myself quite a bit. I was quiet, and um, I had classmates, of course,
Yep.
but I didn't have friends per se. And um, I don't remember a friend really standing out until I got into high school. And
Wow.
by that time, my mom had remarried, and I gained a new brother because of that marriage. And I didn't really have friends until, I would say, middle school, high school. And that was
Why
really
is
when
that? Well,
you
why
know,
is that?
uh, honestly, I think it's more because of the introvertedness of just who I am,
Mhm.
right? I feel comfortable being alone. I feel comfortable in books. And so while, there were social interactions through, sports, things of that nature, I didn't really build or have relationships. We also moved when I was 10 from the Tampa Bay area up into Georgia. And so if I had some friends that were in Florida when I was 10 years old, I certainly didn't carry them, you know,
Yeah,
into
yeah,
Georgia. Right. And
yeah.
so I think that that's probably the main reason was you go through that experience as a 5-year old. There's a little bit of time there. And then by the time you start to really develop meaningful relationships, we moved when I was
Yeah.
10. So there wasn't there wasn't always a friend in the background, if you will, between 5 and 10 years old.
Got it. Got it. That
Yeah.
makes sense. And then
Yeah.
so the remarriage then, how did that have an effect on how you saw or how you see life before and after? Did that have an effect?
It
Having
did.
a stepbrother, did that have an effect?
It did. Yeah. It was a very positive experience. It was a different experience, of course. there was a father now, so he had expectations,
Yeah.
and they were different than not having obviously a father. And yeah, it was a very positive experience that he was able to instill some good family values in us.
So
And
that's a
my stepbrother,
yeah.
my stepbrother and I, we got along very well. We were actually closer in age than my oldest brother, and we had a lot of things in common. And it was a very positive experience.
That's brilliant. And if I were to ask this question to your brother and sister,
Yeah.
would they say the same?
Uh, I would say overall, yes, positive.
Okay.
But I think their experience would have been maybe differently because they were a little bit older than I was when the divorce happened. So they had more time with our father
Hmm.
for the divorce, and they may look at that a little bit differently.
Yeah. So what you're saying, I guess, is that because you didn't spend too much time with your father, um, it was easier for you to accept another person, whereas for them, they
Right.
might have built a relationship that was deep and strong, and
Yeah.
they probably wanted to hold on to it, which
Yeah.
didn't allow someone else to come in that easily.
That's that would be the right assessment. I
Right.
think that, when you think about your first memory as a child, it's probably around the 3 or 4 age, right?
Mm.
And if the event happens around 5, that's limited time.
Yes.
It's limited, right? You don't remember when you're 1 years old. You remember when you're about 3 or 4 years old. And to your point, if they had more time, they would look at that situation probably a little bit different and want to hang on to the
Yeah.
relationship.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And so obviously the timing of the divorce matters a lot too. Then
Yeah, it
basically
does.
that's what they're
Yeah,
saying.
that's right.
um,
Yeah.
you know, and so do they have a good relationship with your stepbrother as well?
Yes, they do. Very good relationship.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes, I guess that's there isn't really a problem because you're already three siblings. You're normally, I don't know about America, but your
Right.
three siblings is good fun. You can
Yeah.
do a
Yeah.
lot of stuff together.
Right.
A fourth one makes it two teams, so you can
Yeah.
actually play sports.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
You can play the tennis doubles, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yep.
um, Awesome. So I mean, this has been a great conversation. A lot of insights into how your mom started off,
Yeah.
successfully managing a single parent family, and then what that instilled in you as values and how that shaped your life.
That's
Um,
right.
and so, if we were to sort of summarize the takeaways for what is it that American society, single parents need to do to sort of bring this kind of an outcome, make it the norm, let's say. Right? How do you make this the norm as opposed to a life of crime and a life of drugs or.
Yeah. I think it all goes back to the immediate family, right? So if you've got immediate family that you can rely on support, that's step number one. Let them know what the experience is. Let them know the challenges that you face so that they can help in any way that they can because they're closest to the experience with you. The second is channeling or looking for supportive groups in the community, whether that's a religious organization, whether that's a community instilled
Mhm.
uh, project or group. I think you need to have at least two different positive outlets that you can
Right.
direct yourself and your family towards, and that can help stabilize. But you made a very good point, which is all about consistency, right? It's only as good as how consistent you are and how consistent you uh, uh, direct that situation
Mhm.
in your family to go towards something that's more meaningful than just the outcome of what's happened. I think if you do those with consistency, then you have a real shot at turning a very negative event into a positive one long term.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I guess I was just to the community point. Um, you and I, we've been discussing this previously as well, that
Right.
it, it's important that we create a network of people, and hopefully through this hour we will
Right.
um, create a network of people, local, support groups where people
Right.
can talk to each other. I'm not sure if we want to call it a support group, but you know, I don't know, friends, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
um, but people who just know what the other person is going through, understands, respects
Yep.
it, empathizes, and is there if required, right? Because a lot of people find that that is the bit that is lacking.
Right.
Some of the
Absolutely.
people might listen, some of the people, other people might empathize, um, and a third person is there, but that person doesn't empathize or listen, and so you've basically got a complete potpourri of people who are uh, doing one thing or the other, but are not necessarily, you know, all of those things required. And
Sure.
obviously, as a part of this channel, we will try to push that community angle as well, depending on when we get the critical mass, let's say.
Definitely. Yeah.
But one other thing that struck me when you said community is that I think in the data that I was looking at yesterday, and you and I talked about, 60% of the counties don't have a therapist in the U.S. I mean, is that right? Is that a therapist or a psychologist or something? I mean, people don't have access to a registered practitioner to talk about their mental health. In
Yeah.
60% of the counties, I mean, it's it's I don't know, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is. And, the first kind of group that you would go to if you're a child going through that experience, I think would be a counselor or some sort of, you know, professional associated to the education system.
Yeah,
Is that the right outlet? Who knows?
yeah,
I think that it really depends on the circumstance, the individual on both sides of the table, the person that's being counseled and the one that's doing the counseling. Um,
absolutely.
so I think that it could work, but it doesn't always have to fall
No,
necessarily on the education system to be there for the support system. It is troubling that 60% of the community, they don't have access, and
yeah. How do
that's
you solve this problem if you don't have access, right? Um, and more importantly, I think to your point that you can't rely on the education system. You can't also just rely on the child to make it happen. I think parents need to
yeah,
make the effort to change themselves, and parents can't take advantage of the support in the education system because they're out of the education system.
that's right.
So if they
Well,
don't have access to therapy or they don't have access to a medical practitioner,
yeah,
it doesn't matter what the school does because at home everything's getting rejigged again.
yeah,
All the foundations that are laid in school are destroyed once the kid is back home.
that's right. And I think that's a great point. We're living in the age of the virus, so everything's being done at home, including education for your children. Work from home, obviously, as us as
Yeah,
professionals. A lot of the institutional framework that used to be there, you can't walk into the counselor's office anymore, right?
yeah,
And so the experience looks completely different. And so there's an opportunity there for someone to figure out that problem. If there's a
yeah.
60% lack of access before this hit, that's only gotten worse,
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely.
So it's a very good point that there needs to be a positive outlet that has enough outreach and that can utilize different resources um, to help and provide value back to the community. If anything, when you look at the data that you shared, if anything, it's accelerated the problem even more, right? Because you realize that structurally, without jobs, without um, income, that there are even more challenges for families to be evicted or for families to get foreclosed on and lose the shelter, and that requires them to go into wherever they can find
Mhm.
shelter. And sometimes that's with different family members, sometimes that's with friends. And when you combine families or
Yeah,
combine individuals that don't have children, it only creates these pockets of opportunity for either negative or positive experiences. And so hopefully we hope that they're all positive, but realistically, we know that that's going
A
to,
little bit negative.
exactly, there's going to be some negative out of that. And the children, of course, suffer from that.
Yeah, and I think that to taking your example, most of the single parents will not be as resilient, will not have a strong foundation like your mom, which
Right.
means that disruption in their life is going to cause intense emotional disruption in their brains as well.
Right.
And and when you combine all of what you said with that emotional dysregulation and disruption in their brain,
Yep.
it's a recipe for disaster.
Right.
It's probably what is causing the numbers to be what they are in the US, right?
Right.
Uh, Brilliant. And so I'll sort of close with, unless there's a couple of things you want to talk about, I'll close with maybe you talking a little bit about how Climb might be able to help with this, and what can be done in the communities through Climb, and maybe our channel, and maybe there's things that we can do together, but can we inform the viewers on that front, the business, how that might help, and how we can collaborate.
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, the solution is extremely accessible to everyone. It's not an exclusive group. And the nature of the technology allows for those that don't have the foundational structure to be able to utilize some of the resources we talked about and be recognized by the system that currently doesn't offer a solution. And that can have meaningful impact on an individual's life, not only in the short term, of course, but also in the long term. And that can really be a productive source of value for the individual, the community, and then overall, those institutions or enterprises that participate. They're having a profound effect
Yeah.
on their immediate community. And so
Yeah.
that's really the value add, or the value proposition is this is a tool that can really highlight a lot of the positives
Mhm.
and explain a lot of the negatives within an individual's personal experience.
Great. And so I'm almost thinking, we've got the Climb, the tool that'll do, as you said, highlight the positives, explain the negatives, give them better opportunities for socioeconomic mobility, right?
Right.
And move upwards, hopefully, not downwards.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but yep, I guess there is an angle there which we discussed from a lending perspective, like community lending options that could be a potential offshoot of something like this. But now that we're talking about community support and the angle that we were talking about just now from a mental health perspective, I'm
Yeah.
just thinking these two things are completely synergistic, right? Uh, because you are more invested in the person that you're emotionally supporting, and
Right.
then you would probably want to help them financially get out of that economic uh, hole that they're in, and make a life for themselves. And because you're both emotionally invested, you're more likely to get your money back too,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. I think that is the correlation in between the two, right? Um, it's it's easy to go through a traumatic experience and isolate it to just being a traumatic experience, but everything is connected.
yeah,
And so, I think, back to my own experience of going through that as a child, the connectivity was, okay, this is going to impact my family from my mom's perspective.
yeah,
But the economic perspective was one that was as severe and more meaningful, because visibly an opportunity was lost through income.
mm,
And that's there was quite strong correlation in between the two.
yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And let me close with this one final question.
Sure.
Would life have been different if you were not a white American family?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Would your life have been completely different if you were not a white American family?
That's a great question. I don't know. Uh, you know, I think the answer is yes, that it would be different. How it would be different, I don't I don't fully know, because I don't know what that, a different experience looks like. And I haven't done enough research. For me, Sanjay, the impact even of what society is going through right now, for me, it's a socioeconomic problem.
Okay.
And I view that as systematic. I think it's really it's there is something missing in the system. And um, I don't know how the experience would be different, but it would be different.
Yeah, I mean, well, what I was getting at is, we've got the big Black Lives Matter movement. We have in the day we have Black Panthers movements, and there is this idea of institutional racism in America, and
Right.
that obviously has massive impacts on socioeconomic mobility for
Yeah.
families of color, right? And so,
Right.
if you were a family of color and you lived in the same places, uh, and maybe even went to the same schools, uh, would it be the case that you probably would have been treated differently? Your mom would have had different opportunities for a job and not the same ones. And it's probably more likely that she would have lost her job before somebody else if there was a situation in the office. Do you see what I mean? Uh, is
Yeah.
there a higher likelihood that things could have gone wrong?
I again, I think that there are differences, and to say that there aren't isn't being realistic.
Yeah.
I personally can't speak to anything other than my own experience, but I think it's a fair question to ask. The answer is I don't know. And for me, I never experienced or was a part of racism. Right. That's a
You never
benefit.
saw it happen anywhere you were living and in
No,
schools. Did you
no.
have people of color in your schools, in your neighborhood?
Yeah, we did. And when I was in Florida, we grew up, and
When I
it.
say people of color, that term is so weird, right? We all use it, but white is also a color, isn't it?
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
uh, we all
But
use
no,
it.
again, I was lucky in that I didn't experience that as a child. I never saw that. I didn't experience it as an adult. For me, the underlying issues are economic.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
lens that I saw.
okay.
Um,
And that's the only lens that you saw as well.
that's right.
And
Yeah.
because if you were in Compton, as outskirts of LA,
Right.
a Black American single parent family, I think the issues that you would see would be
Yeah.
you
It
know,
would be different.
different.
Right. Yeah.
Probably one of them would be economic, but there would be others as well.
Yeah.
And then again, if you were in Brooklyn, that's a different answer. In
Correct.
New Jersey, it'll be a different answer. So obviously, there's a regional, localized perspective to this
Yep.
that needs to be factored in.
Yep.
And maybe that's also something parents need to think about, right? Like moving out of neighborhoods that are not necessarily going to be helpful.
Yeah.
And a lot of people want to live in the cities or suburbs of cities, um, and and I always think that's probably better for the kids if you can't earn enough money to live in a good place in a city. It's probably better that you earn a little money in a village.
Right.
Because your kids will have a much more positive upbringing there,
Yep.
as opposed to forcing them to live in Compton amidst drugs and gangs and
Right.
but
Yeah.
many people don't seem to make that choice.
Yeah. And part of that is the mobility issue. They're in there. They don't have the resources to get themselves out, and that's the challenge. Is because you brought that up, was my upbringing. Did I live in a bad or a rough neighborhood? I didn't. Could the outcome have been different? Sure, yeah, and I think
Yeah.
it would be different if I was in a situation where it was a rough area like Compton in the '90s. That
Yeah.
would be extremely difficult
I would be
to
hearing your name in the news.
get out. Exactly. Yeah.
I think anybody would do that. I mean, either you'd be a music label producer,
Yeah.
you're a music producer working with Dr. Dre. But that's great. I mean, I think that is a very important angle that we need to consider, right? Because um, we've looked at influence of parents, influence of grandmothers,
Hmm.
extended family, siblings, step parents, step brothers, and step siblings, friends. But
Yeah.
uh, the environment is the single biggest factor. I mean, many people don't know this, but scientifically proven fact is that the environment that the kid grows in, the locality, is the single biggest driver for their outcomes in life.
Yeah.
If it's
I
not a
believe
good,
so.
yeah, if it's not a good locality, it doesn't matter what the parents do. It doesn't matter what the grandparents do. It doesn't even matter what the kid does. You will get sucked into stuff if you're in a bad neighborhood.
Yeah.
Um, and and I think that's where the community angle comes in as well, because you've got to sort of work towards creating healthy neighborhoods. And
Right.
the mobility is not just individual mobility, right? It's the mobility of a community, of a neighborhood, from being a rough neighborhood to being a soft neighborhood, let's say, or a smooth neighborhood. Uh,
Right.
and I think that's often overlooked.
Yeah. And I
In
think that, that's a good point. You talk about, some resources, for the Boys and Girls Club to be there and available. That was part of building the community, giving them an outlet and giving their community an opportunity to do something positive. Without that, uh, you're right. There's a lot of room for mischief as a young person, and so it had an effect certainly, but I don't think it alone was was the driver. It was a combination of the three that we've already
Yeah,
discussed.
absolutely. I mean, if you have a good neighborhood,
Yeah,
you're much more likely to have a positive outcome in life.
that's
But
right.
that doesn't mean you, and you surely will, because you still need good parenting, you still need a good
Right.
family support system.
Yeah.
But you could probably do without them if you have strong will, if you're in a
Right.
good neighborhood. Right.
That's
That's what the research found, that if you have a very good neighborhood with a strongly willed, emotionally
yeah.
stable person who can channel their energy, then a lot of the other factors are, they fall by the wayside almost. You
Yeah.
can deal with them, you can manage them. You probably don't want to, but you can if they come up.
Right.
Brilliant. But Matt, thank you very much for talking us through this. I think it's an interesting perspective. It's great that we're starting off with on a positive note,
Sure.
a positive
Yeah.
and
That's my pleasure, and I've enjoyed the conversation and look forward to a follow up conversation with you as well.
yeah,
So
brilliant. Maybe when I talk about my past in this industry, maybe you can
sure.
interview me. I'll get you as a test interview.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Matt.
You're welcome.
Cheers.
All right. Have a good day. Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
too. All right. Bye.